Hello, I'm Sherry Cooper. As many of you know, I'm an economist, and in fact, until about 5 months ago, I was chief economist of the Bank of Montreal. And I've been in Edmonton many times speaking to groups such as yourselves. In fact, I've been all over the world speaking about the economy and financial markets for the past 35 years. It's a great pleasure to be here to talk to you today. I wish I could be there in person, but this is the next best thing. I have spent my career watching the Canadian, US, and global economies, financial markets, and of course, that has a tremendous impact on real estate investment and real estate markets in general. I'd like to begin, though, by giving you a broader sense of what I think is important in today's rapidly changing environment. One thing I do believe that's absolutely crucial is that you realize that the only thing that will be constant is change. We can predict all that we want about what might happen to interest rates this year or next year. We can talk about inflation, we can talk about the housing market, we can talk about the Canadian economy. I am optimistic about the outlook. I do believe that Canada will continue to grow at about a 2% pace, moderate enough to keep inflation under control. But Canada's economy is relatively close to full employment, especially in comparison to the US and to the devastated economies of much of Europe. That means that inevitably interest rates are likely today at their lowest levels we'll see in the next 5 years. Now, all of that, of course, is in a context of amazing volatility and unpredictable events. I call it an economic climate change. We all know about the climate change that's occurring so vividly and so disastrously in our environment. You're not very far from Calgary and the floods, and the recent floods in Toronto as well, not to mention the extraordinary weather, reminds us that the world is changing and that the effects of that can be very, very scary. The truth is, though, in every aspect of the environment, the economy, and financial investments, we are also seeing climate change. And what that means is we must be adaptable. You know, Charles Darwin said long ago that it wasn't the strongest and biggest and smartest among the species that survive, but the most adaptable. And in today's world, where so many of us are confronted with career changes, with job losses, and with tremendous uncertainty, more than ever, we need to understand that we work in an environment of random shocks, of great stochasticity, meaning that nothing is certain. And so I applaud many of you who are looking at real estate investment as your plan B, as an alternative to simply having a job or working in the same business for years and years. All of us need to have a plan B. We can't count any longer on having a guaranteed salary and a guaranteed pension. We're all responsible, in fact, for our own financial security over the short term and the long term. In addition, in today's world, no one has job security. And in fact, many, many people have found themselves in a position where they have to take control of their own destiny. Now, from an economic perspective, Canada has been a safe haven. We all know that we didn't experience the depth of the of the recession and financial crisis that was suffered so dramatically south of the border and into Europe and the rest of the world during the 2008 financial crisis and its fallout. We've been very fortunate because we have a very stable, solid banking system. We have political stability. We have a bank, a central bank, that has tremendous credibility. And for a very long time, we have enjoyed near full employment with continued strength in many of our most important industries. Of course, in Edmonton, you are very sensitive to the changes that have been evident. The oil and gas industry, of course, is a primary contributor to the buoyancy of the real estate markets in your communities. We have seen in Edmonton a continued growth in the housing market, but not at a bubble pace, not at the kind of level that we've seen historically in Vancouver, for example. Housing is much more affordable in Edmonton. However, even in Edmonton, of course, you will be subject to the impact of governmental changes. For example, the changes in CMHC housing mortgage guarantees, the tightening of those markets. The Bank of Canada continues to support a reduction in household debt extension. The good news, in my view, is that consumer confidence in Canada is improving and that the consumer household balance sheet is also improving. Canada's fiscal position is among the strongest in the world, and that too lends to the stability in our economy. Also, foreign investment is pouring into the country. Investment in our financial assets, in our government bonds, in our stock market, but also investments in real estate and in industrial production. We've seen, of course, tremendous demand for Canadian manufacturing and resource companies on the part of many of the global players. That kind of influx of foreign capital will continue. Now, the Canadian dollar is off its peak, but the Canadian dollar at around 97 cents US is still quite strong by historical standards. And it means that the export markets are continuing to be confronted with competitive pressures. As the US economy is rebounding, the American economy is attracting more and more manufacturing activity. Energy in the US is increasing explosively. You all know about the development of the American shale gas and shale oil sectors, which has dramatically increased the supply of energy in the US and reduced the cost. Now they're using natural gas to produce electricity. Natural gas prices in the US are at their lowest level anywhere in the world. And so that, in combination with cuts in union power and significant slowdown in wage inflation, has made the United States now a very attractive haven for foreign manufacturing activity. Now, that's good news and bad news for Canada. On the bad news front, certainly central Canada, Ontario especially, has been negatively impacted by the outsourcing of auto production from Canada to the United States. However, on the other hand, a stronger American economy, by definition, necessarily means that we will see a stronger Canadian economy. The demand for Canadian goods and services will continue to be fundamentally based in the United States. However, again, back to the need for change and adjustment, the fastest growing economies of the world continue to be the emerging economies, particularly emerging Asia. it's essential that we support the development of Canadian trade with the emerging world. And that means an east-west pipeline to take the oil from Fort McMurray to Edmonton and across the western part of our country to the deep sea ports of British Columbia. That Gateway Pipeline, as you all so well know, is mired in a political debate and as well as an environmental debate. Now, I'm not an environmental scientist, and I don't want to get into the details of the pros and cons of what the impact would be on our climate. But what I do know is that pipeline activity is not a new technology. It's well developed, and there are many measures that can be taken to assure the safety. In fact, it's so important that Canada rely not only on the strength and buoyancy of the US economy, but also that we trade elsewhere in the world. That's simply at a nation level, the degree of diversification that all of us, in fact, need to incorporate it at our own personal financial levels. Diversification in terms of our investments, our opportunities, our knowledge base is, again, the only security we have in a rapidly changing global environment. Digitization, the whole world of the internet and the spin-offs of digital technology into every aspect of life, from marketing to entertainment to biosciences, has become the fundamental underpinning of change. We know, all of us, that we're responsible for our own personal education. Technology is changing so rapidly that, in fact, there is not a single endeavor in the global economy that is not dramatically impacted. We're hearing announcements of mergers of large behemoth companies that prior to this time would never have been imagined. We're seeing the blurring of lines between industry sectors. The fact that big data now has become such an enormous driver of the development of economic growth as well as opportunity is another major example of just how rapidly the world is changing. We need to embrace change. We need to understand that it can be seen as a challenge or it can be seen as an opportunity. There's certainly a good deal of concern about this. It does mean that the very ground upon which we stand is shifting. But as much as adversity is a part of today's world, the fact is that the opportunities in this environment also become very important. The application of digitization to the housing market is a great example. It won't be long before we have a global MLS system where every property everywhere in the world, be it for rent or lease or sale, in fact, will be covered on the internet, so that your client base, your customer base, is no longer your local community or your local marketplace, but in fact is truly the global marketplace. Any company today with a website becomes a global multinational company. In this environment, I urge you to at least feel the comfort of knowing that you're living in a country, very few exist, that is a rock-solid AAA rated country, and that's not going to change. That, yes, to be sure, interest rates have been at extraordinarily low levels, but when they do rise, they will rise gradually. inflation, in my view, will remain under control. The equity markets have rebounded sharply since March of 2009. The Canadian stock market, which, by the way, outpaced all the other stock markets of the world earlier this cycle, has now underperformed, largely as a result of our banking system never having collapsed, and as well, until recently, the underperformance of the energy sector and, of course, RIM, or now BlackBerry, the technology meltdown that we experienced at the same time that Apple and other American tech companies were booming. Energy prices now have moved back up. And that, of course, has been positive for your local economy. But in general, there's no question in my mind that with the increasing supply of energy in the United States, the demand for Canadian oil and gas from the US will begin to slow. That hasn't happened yet because instead the US has reduced its imports from the unfriendly countries of the Middle East or Venezuela. But in time, Canada must adjust to this dramatically changing environment. And again, for that reason, I urge the economy to adjust through the development of trade beyond the United States. And then finally, bottom line, we must take responsibility for our own future, for the future of our families, for the future of our businesses. There is no better way to do that than to continue in your education. Your personal intellectual development, your personal emotional development is the only true way to assure continued success. Thank you.